Everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, I'm here with Cricket, and continuing on from our podcast a couple weeks ago, which was around the upper world. Today we're talking about the lower world, isn't that right?
We are talking about the lower world. And I know that you and I have had some interesting experiences and journeys over the years into the lower world. And I think that there is a huge distinction in my mind between the lower world and the upper world. And it could also be that I was taught that there was a big distinction between the upper world and the lower world. And I want to pick up just very briefly on the excellent question that Doug asked last time we met in relation to the celestial bodies being part of the celestial sky or part of the middle world. And I kind of wanted to bring it back for a second about the medicine wheel. When we have the center of the medicine wheel, we have the four center stones. The four center stones, first is the creator stone, followed by Mother Earth, which I associate with as the lower world on the medicine wheel. So in the medicine wheel in the center, I have the lower world represented as my Mother Earth stone. My grandmother moonstone is a representative of the middle world. And the stone that I use for Father Sky is my stone for the upper world. So even within the medicine wheel, we have a distinction and a relationship between the upper world and the middle world. And in the medicine wheel, it is thought that Grandmother Moon is a celestial body that does kind of govern over the middle world. And that Father Sky is that all-encompassing over expanse of self. So we have a relationship kind of conjoining and dividing at the same time. The other stones in the middle of the medicine wheel is the fifth, which is turtle, which is earth. The sixth, which represents the clan or the totem of frog, which is water. The seventh is the totem thunderbird and fire. And eighth, which is the totem of butterfly and of air. And then from there we move out into the four directions as stones 9, 10, 11, and 12. The lower world. I think people have usually an easier time traveling through the lower world than they do through the upper world. When we do lower world journeys, quite often newbies or people not really familiar with traveling have an easier time going into the lower world. And I have a few theories on that. So let me share my theories because, you're my captive audience and you have no choice but to listen to my theories. So here you go. My very first theory about the lower world is that it's safe and it's comfortable. I divide the world into our chakras. So the lower world is the third chakra, the second chakra, and the root chakra, and then the chakras of the legs and the feet and whatever your chakra modality teaches you. And then the second part of, is the fourth, the fifth, and possibly even the sixth as being a middle world. And then the upper world is most definitely could be your fifth, your sixth, and your seventh, depending on where you go. So I think that most people are willing to dig into themselves in a superficial or a healing perspective than they are willing to go into the upper regions of the superconsciousness and out of their own control, per se. The lower world is usually far more active than the upper world. The lower world usually is the engagement of warrior, the engagement of the healer, the engagement of the seer, the spiritual seer. So the lower world really does engage 3 of the 4 primary archetypes of shamanism. The 4th primary archetype in shamanism is the teacher. And the teacher, as we talked about in the upper world, is the archetype of the upper world, is that teacher. One time, I have to share this with you because it was hilarious. There was a gentleman who had tried, Lord love him, he had tried to get into the lower world, and he had come to my small circle in my basement at the behest of a friend of his. And he came and they stayed after circle had done and talked with me, and he shared with me his experience. And his experience was he found a way into the lower world. And the wind from the lower world literally had him upside down, and he was hanging on to the top of a tree. So he was face down and his feet were up, and he kept trying to pull himself deeper and deeper into the lower world, and he couldn't get any further, and he was really quite frustrated. And as he's on my couch talking to me, I said, "Oh, so what's your relationship to the feminine?" Because the lower world is in the medicine wheel is represented by Mother Earth. And he said, "Well, I'm just going through a divorce and I'm having a rough time." So I'm like, "Oh, well, okay, that makes sense." And then I said, "Well, and was your ex-wife anything like your mom?" "Oh, she sure turned out to be like my mom. I never want to revisit my relationship with my mom again." And I laughed internally, because I truly could see that as the inability to move into the lower world, because it is associated with the feminine generally. It is associated with Mother Earth generally. It is associated with relationships and nurturing and healing. And I don't think that this man was there, but it stands out in my mind as one of the most graphic examples of what it takes to actually have the courage to move down into the lower world. So what generally happens? I described before that when you go into the lower world, you're looking for a natural opening. We generally try to look for natural openings. I know some people have used elevators and escalators to go down to the lower world. That's what am I going to say? Heck, I'm not in their world. I don't know why they use an escalator and elevator. I like going down into the lower world in various forms. I have many, many trials and tribulations over the years. I have gone through large holes that turned out to be holes so small that an earthworm had to eat me up and shit me out so that I could actually get through the entrance of the lower world. I have had fallen down chutes that were so long that I got dizzy. I get dizzy really easy in the real world. Don't spin around in the spirit world, because I'm bound to get even dizzier. And then I've also had cartoon entrances where there's the stone that was covering a big hole, and I'm Wile E. Coyote, and I step over what looks like a stone, and it's not a stone, and it's actually just a piece of cloth that looks like a stone, and I can literally see the little umbrella in my hand and the placard saying "help me" as I'm pummeled and dropped down through the lower world. So it's an exciting place to go for many things. That's also where we meet our power animal. Power animals are spirits. We've talked about power animals. I know there are a couple of guided meditations that we have on the website on shamansway.net. We also have we have articles written on the lower world. You're finding your first power animal. So there are visual ways and there are intellectual ways of learning more about this. So this is really just my journey into some of my experiences in the lower world. This is where I perform a lot of healing work. If I find someone that is in need of deeper extraction than what I can do in my healing room, I have always at hand in the lower world a table that looks like an operating table, only it's made of stone. And that is where I generally put my patients and myself, and if I have other healing spirits, are there to help me. It's also where the lake of the unconscious and the conscious meet, that liminal place between the unconscious being underneath the water and the consciousness of being that space, that air above water. So water is a huge way of entering into the lower world. It also is another way of entering into the lower worlds. So we talked about in the upper world that there are an infinite number of upper worlds. In the lower world, there are also an infinite number of lower worlds. Some traditions teach different things. In Norse mythology, there are 9 worlds. In some of the Buddhist traditions, there are over 1,000 worlds. There are many different types of worlds. I really just like to keep it simple in the upper world, the lower, and the middle world. In the lower world is also where I encounter the place of the land of the dead, and that is where I do some of my soul retrieval work. It's also the place where I encounter the darkest places. especially if I'm working on healing within my own self, healing within my own psyche, getting to the roots of my problems. I will journey down many layers to the spirit world. So I'll journey down seven stairs and I'm down one level, and I journey down another 7 stairs and I'm down another level, and continuing to go downstairs as I continue to go down into the deeper aspects of my own self. I also use the lower world as a way of tracking. I know that you will learn more about tracking, and you might already know quite a bit about tracking. Tracking in the lower world, one of the easiest things to do to learn how to track is to have someone hide something in a room for you, and then to journey. This is a middle world journey. I'm kind of tricking you up here a bit. But if you get practice in the middle world, you get better at it in the lower world. So in tracking, you're trying to find what that object is that the person has left in the room and where it is and what it is. Then we learn how to track in the lower world. Not only can we track other people, but we can also track ourselves. We can track our lives into the past as much as we can track our lives into the future. I find that the lower world has a much different relationship to physics than the upper world does. The lower world has accesses to the upper world as well, same as there are backdoor entrances from the upper world that get you into the lower world, where you don't have to jump off the moon and catapult into the Earth's atmosphere and land in the middle world. The lower world is a place where you find quite a number of the answers for things that you're looking for. So if you're trying to find an answer to why do my feet hurt, it would be good to go into the lower world and talk to the beings that have a relationship to healing. Many of the healing techniques are taught to me through the lower world. When I was on my warrior path, when I was in the south of the medicine wheel and learning much about being a warrior to do the spirit work that I was setting out to do, those teachers came to me from the lower world, not from the upper world. And I think the lower world is a place that gets a whole lot dirtier than the upper world does. I haven't encountered in the upper world beings that are necessarily malevolent, but I have certainly encountered beings in the lower world that are malevolent. I think that the lower world, as well as we get into the lower chakras, which I mentioned earlier, really deal with the deep, dark aspects of not only our own self, but the deeper, darker aspects of the human world. So if we are to understand why polluting is more important than our future generations, then we journey into the lower world to ask the spirit of greed or the spirit of toxic or the spirit of oil what is going on, and can we change things, or how can we live with things. So we have the ability to speak to the lower ideas or ideologies of humankind in the lower world. We also have the ability to track our emotions and our own healing in the lower world because we have access to a timeline. We have the access of the timeline of where we are now straight back to when we were born, and we can revisit those parts of ourselves. In the upper world, I don't find that nearly quite as available to us. Another thing that I like to do in the lower world is if I have to go somewhere and I need to know how to go there and I don't want to leave a trace, I'll do it in the lower world. It's like running through the subways. How many times you watch spy movies where they run through the subways so that cell phones can't detect them, or so that they can't be seen through heat-seeking sources on helicopters. It's kind of the same thing in the lower world. Nothing can really find you, but you can be found by other things. So it's always good to have an awareness. In dealing with the other aspects of the lower world and our healing, oftentimes our younger self, our soul, in some traditions it's called our fetch, in other traditions it's just called the younger soul. In different traditions, we talk about having a different number of souls. So 3 souls, 6 souls, 9 souls. I'm just going to stick to the one soul right now because I think that that's pretty straightforward. The healing of the soul usually occurs when we can access the younger aspects of ourselves. So if you have an issue and you're if you're angry, perhaps underneath that anger is fear. And perhaps underneath that fear is safety. And perhaps underneath that safety is loss of safety. And perhaps underneath that loss of safety is abandonment. And perhaps underneath that abandonment is that relationship of love being severed. How many layers did I go down? Do you see what I mean by the lower world? So the lower world, we get to go through the subconscious aspects of ourself that we've forgotten, the subconscious aspects of ourself that truly have shaped and created who we are, our formative years. Our formative wounds are generally kept within the lower world. One of the lessons that I teach to my students, as well as a lesson I continually learn, is that I cannot vibrate any higher than the depth of my deepest wound. So it is incumbent upon me as I move through the spirits and as I move through my path, if I wish to vibrate at a higher level, then it takes one time and energy to travel to the darker or the hidden aspects of myself. The lower world is also a great place to get information about rocks or crystals. The middle world is great, but let's be honest, crystals and stones are kept in the base of the mountain, not generally in the upper portions of the mountain. So we blow up mountains to get to different geodes or different understanding. So we would travel into the lower world to have a discussion with Amethyst to say, hey, Amethyst, what are you about? Or to journey into the mud and down and below to talk to Amber and say, hey, Amber, what's up? What's going on? How do I work with you? Another aspect of the lower world is that it contains the roots of the world tree, so that unity. So the world tree is the unity of the upper, the lower, and the middle world. And in the roots of the lower world, we can travel through and find our ancestral path, or find a path of our spiritual mastery. We have so many ways of traveling through the unknown and the mysterious psyche in the lower world that seem to affect us more on a conscious, cognitive, and physical perspective. The upper world, in my experience, alters and allows us to reframe our ideology. I'm not saying that that profound healings in the lower world don't affect how you experience the world and how you move in the world. All I'm saying is that generally in the lower world, we have more profound healing on the here and the now and in how we move in the physical world. The relationship of power animals, that's such an interesting topic. And many people travel into the lower world to find a relationship to the power animals. I read many years ago in the book put out from Mr. Harner from the Foundation for Shamanic Studies that the shamans of the Central America, where he was, believed that if you didn't have a power animal, you were either very sick or you were going to die. I don't know if that's true about every culture. I have no idea. But what I do know is that my power animals have become a really integral part of my healing self. I have a grand relationship with them. I also know that power animals in the lower world come and go. Some power animals come and will stay with you forever throughout your whole time. Maybe bear, maybe wolf, it could be squid. I have no idea what your main power animal is. But power animals also have the ability to go places, so they don't have to stay with you. I've had power animals go and come throughout my years of journeying, and I have had power animals that have remained with me for many years. One of the things that I read, and I thought, this makes sense. One of the things I read was that the power animals stay with you only as long as you need them to in order to learn the lesson that they carry. What I also know in my own experience, in my own journeys, is that spirit is going to present itself to you in a form you're going to be able to recognize and work with. So if you have an expectation of a wolf and you get a mouse as your power animal, then the spirits want you to recognize what a mouse is in your world. And I can't speak to what a relationship you have with mouse. And maybe you do have a wolf for a power animal. I have no idea. I know that my power animals each have been responsible for teaching me various and very different things. Otter has taught me so much about the aquatic world, aquatic medicine, and what I need to heal people and what I need to always carry in my medicine pouch. Otter has also taught me how to play, taught me how to laugh, taught me that they are amazing parents and how much community and caring means to the otter. I have journeyed many years with Bear, and Bear has changed shape so many times. It's astounding. I've worked with the grizzly bear. I've worked with a polar bear, a black bear, a brown bear. I've worked with the cave bear. I've worked with all sorts of bears, and bears have been very gentle teachers. And also one time, Bear ripped the nose off my face, dug a grave, and shoved me in it. And, I was telling a friend of mine, she started laughing. I said, "What do you find so funny?" And she said, "So don't cut off your nose to spite your face." And that made sense to me. It was not, and it fit the journey. It was like I was saying no to a gift that I should have been given, and I didn't want the gift. And so as a result, Bear ripped my nose off, shoved me into a grave, and left me there. And it was not anyway, I didn't end up suffering any damage, but it truly learned the lesson of humbleness when that happens to you. I've also had the experience of having a small spider walking beside me, and as I'm journeying, I think, "Oh, little spider, I can carry you, I can take you further than where you're going. Come on my shoulder," and picked up this beautiful little spider, put it on my shoulder, and the next thing I know, this spider turned into a huge spider, and I and my power animal were on the back of the spider, and every step this one of her 8 legs took bent time. So it was a test. It was a test to see, can I have compassion for something that is smaller than me? Can I pick something up? Can I do something? Another time I had one of my power animals die on me, and it's horrifying. But I remember going through all of my herbs and all of my healing in my pouch just to try to keep this power animal alive and try to keep it back alive. And it did survive. And then I found out later from one of my teachers that power animals test you. And they test you to find out if you're as loyal to them as they are to you. So they will test you either by getting lost, they will test you by dying, they will test you by leaving you to find out whether or not you're going to go after them. Are you going to save them? Is the relationship a one-way street? In the spirit world, it's a two-way street. If you want to have a good relationship with something, you have to work on that relationship. It just isn't there at the first meeting. You might fall in love with each other. You might have this amazing connection to an animal that you meet, but it's like love at first sight. It's so amazing. And those, the dopamine is flowing, the serotonin is flowing, the acetylcholine is flowing, and we're like, woo, in that place. It's the same. It can be the same thing with a power animal. But once that glow wears off, then you have to understand the final makings of this relationship and the final makings of that relationship, and so on and so forth. So the lower world teaches me a lot about how do I heal myself, how do I heal others, and how do I manifest that into this world? How do I take the lessons of my subconscious, unconscious, deep buried self? How do I pull that up through my heart chakra so that I can understand it? How do I pull those lessons up through my throat chakra so I can speak it, and up into the 6th and the 7th chakra so I can actually manifest what I need to manifest? So the relationship truly is like the world tree in that it is absolutely a symbol of unity, but they are absolutely separate. So that is some of my stories about the lower world. Back to you, Doug.
Thank you very much again, Cricket, for sharing all that. A quick question. You kind of mentioned earlier that people, and especially new folks to journeying, have an easier time probably going to the lower world. I know that resonates with my own experience.
Right.
You also kind of mentioned there's more perhaps malevolent spirits and different things down there. Given it's easier, but potentially a little more hazardous, are there any things that new folks should be watching out for?
Oh, excellent question. I don't always cover that. One of the fun aspects of the book that I referred to, The Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner, is when he talked about going into the lower world, he said to avoid swarms of insects, he said to avoid snakes with large teeth, and he said to avoid fish with large teeth. And then many years later, he said, I wish I'd never written that, because that simply wasn't true. What I find is one thing that is really important, especially when you're learning to journey, is wherever you go, remember how you got there and come back the same way. The other thing is that I wouldn't recommend to a newbie to journey without a power animal. I actually wouldn't recommend journeying without a power animal. Even after all of these years, power animals have helped me in more cases than I can possibly imagine. Another thing that I would recommend to people learning to journey is also to learn to take gifts with them. And remember that they always have a magic pouch. And in that magic pouch is always going to be something that will appease and maybe even please the spirits that are around you. It's important to also keep your wits about you. Many of us, we don't have a large attention span. So you'll be 30 seconds in the journey and then you're thinking about your laundry list, or you're 30 seconds into the journey and then you think about a fight you had with a friend or a romantic experience you had. And one of the primary aspects of doing any kind of journey work is practice. And discipline takes time, and learning how to maintain your focus for 15 minutes, as easy as it sounds, for a lot of people is next to impossible. So those are some of the ideas I think I have.
All right, very cool. If folks are looking for some journeys and some help on finding your power animals, if you don't have them, we do have some links on our site, and we'll include those in the show notes for this episode. So please do visit us at shamansway.net/podcast, and you should find everything you're looking for there. All right, thank you again, Cricket.
Thanks a lot, Doug.
If you're enjoying the Shaman's Way podcast and or the resources over at shamansway.net, and you would think others would benefit from listening to it or finding these things, or you'd simply want to send a little good karma our way, we would love it if you would head on over to iTunes and leave a rating and a comment. That's the biggest way you can show us your support. A big thank you to those who already have. We really do appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again in a couple of weeks. Cheers.